go ahead and reply back and I'll take you off that distribution list. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Doug and John. Thank you guys for bringing this topic to our customers today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Deb. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Doug Bell. I'm a Power Platform technical specialist on our state and local government team. I'm based out of Denver, Colorado, and out of interest, perhaps, necessity, maybe, I've assumed a bit of a fondness for administration and governance of Power Platform through the years. One of our first tech series sessions we ever did was a administration and governance 101, as I now call it, session. That was back in January of 2023. And really this session is to recap that content very briefly, more so to build on that with innovations in the platform and a much more holistic vision for how we can manage Power Platform, empower different development individuals, teams, groups, etc., and do so at scale more efficiently and with less effort. I'm thrilled today to be joined by John Landgrave. John is on our global black belt team. Internally, we often refer to him as the godfather of governance. John is certainly a visionary behind many of the features that we'll be showcasing today, and certainly behind the way that they all come together to allow you to construct a comprehensive and effective governance and administration strategy for the platform. John, I always do this, certainly when I have new guests to the series join me. I got to put you on the spot. What are you going to be for Halloween, John? Are we going as like a professional pickleballer? Are we doing improv enthusiast? What are you dressing up as tonight?
Well, I'm going to end up doing a little bit of everything. We're actually having a big Halloween bash at the Pickle Barn tonight, and I will be Batman and my wife will be Catwoman, and we're doing a karaoke party along with open mic. So obviously that will not be recorded because it may not be for general consumption, but it'll be a good night.
So this was not scripted, but that response is better than I ever could have imagined. The Pickle Barn, I love that. Yeah. I think I have two answers to that question myself. During the day, I'm dressing up as a professional because rarely do I look like this, and I'm looking at myself in the camera and I'm thinking I look kind of nerdy. Tonight, I will probably put on my hot dog suit that I've worn for the last 15 years. But don't worry, it's always a unique costume, right? It started out as a hot dog, and then I put a scarf on, and I went as a chili dog. And then I took some like Frank's Red Hot labels and stuck those on there, and I was a hot Frank, and maybe I'll go as a chorizo. I haven't actually figured out what I'm going to do this year. If I can get my hands on a lederhosen, maybe I'll go as a bratwurst. I don't know. It's always a last minute decision, but yeah, I don't get super creative. Well, I guess I do when it comes to my Halloween costumes. But anyways, thank you for indulging me, John. We're going to hear more from John as we go along. He's certainly going to be watching the chat for us, but I'm just going to tee us up and get us started here, and then I'm going to turn over to John to actually show some of these things in action. But my thought for the day was to do a very quick recap of just foundational principles around administration and governance, and I'm just real. This is the other thing I'm doing. I now have a very affectionate cat, black cat, of course, that wants to get on the camera for Halloween. So yeah, enjoy that. So we're going to do a quick recap of Administration and Governance 101, and then we're going to get into what does enterprise mode for Power Platform look like, and use that as a transition to understand the features, the enhanced governance and administration features that come along with that enterprise mode, and allow us to meet a higher expectation or a higher level of standard learning and delegating responsibilities within the platform when we get into touching enterprise data sources and developing more of what we would call line of business or enterprise applications. So that's our plan for the day. And once again, thank you all for joining us. Basic stuff, breeze through it, right? Like I can't understand anything around administration and governance in Power Platform unless I'm aware of and understand basic principles around environments within the platform. An environment, of course, is really just a workspace, a landing zone, we call them in the Azure space. It's a container for users, artifacts, and efforts that are going on in Power Platform. All tenants have a default environment. All users in that tenant, all Active Directory users that have at least an M365, E3, or G3 license have access to that default environment. And therefore, we strongly advise folks to view that as a personal productivity environment only, and not to strive to really restrict access to that environment, but to understand what's going on in there, to educate folks on appropriate use, and to monitor what's going on in that environment. And that, of course, means that for any of these line of business or enterprise applications, we want to be moving into quote unquote custom environments for different business units, for different organizations, environments that facilitate ALM processes like a dev test production concept. But we have these individual environments that allow us to delegate different types of controls, permissions, access, et cetera, within Power Platform. Within an environment, access is governed at the top level by Enter ID. I have to authenticate into the tenant. Once I authenticate in, Power Platform is going to show me environments that I have access to, right? And what I can do in those environments, the data that I can see, the applications, the resources that I can interact with, all of that is governed by RBAC, or role-based access control, which is defined within that environment and oftentimes within the Dataverse instance within that environment. At a high level for controls, and this is back to our 101 stuff, right? We want to be aware of these data loss prevention policies, or how we can control and restrict the connectors that are available in different environments, and put guardrails in place for what our makers, creators, and users can do in those environments. So of course we want to pay attention to DLP. If you're not familiar with what that means, it's a concept to get familiar with. We also probably want to turn on tenant isolation, right? And this restricts access to guest users via Power Platform tools, right? This is an important concept, and by default, we probably want to turn tenant isolation on, and then we can open up either inbound or outbound connections when use case demands that type of access, and we're comfortable granting it. We also want to protect our environment strategy, and by this I mean we probably don't want all of our licensed users being able to go out there and create their own sandbox and production environments. And there's very simple, easy toggles that we can control as tenant administrators within the Power Platform Admin Center that'll limit environment creation to only specific administrators. And then we can put in place some kind of environment request process, whether that's an existing help desk ticketing system, or we want to use the environment request app from that Center of Excellence starter kit, et cetera. These are some of the basic principles, right? Like this gets us to a level 100, 200 level of proficiency as far as administering and governing Power Platform. This is actually new capabilities here, right? I want to make sure that everybody's aware of the analytics that we now have natively within the Power Platform Admin Center. Previously, if I wanted to get this type of inventory insights into artifacts that exist in Power Platform, I really had no choice but to implement that Center of Excellence starter kit, which would create a very comprehensive inventory of all environments, artifacts, et cetera, within Power Platform, and then give me visibility through Power BI dashboards that I could also deploy through those COE starter kit assets. One of the things that Center of Excellence does for us is act as an incubation space to understand what types of governance controls folks are most interested in, what they're getting the most value from. And then we take that insight and we take those high priority items and bring them into the native platform. And these analytics for apps, automations, et cetera, is a great example of that. We're now in Power Platform Admin Center. I have native access without needing to deploy that COE starter kit to getting pretty detailed inventory information that I can use to provide insight, or to gain insight into what folks are doing in these environments, and ensure that folks are working in the right space, are adhering to our governance policies, procedures, expectations, et cetera. So all of that is kind of a quick recap, plus the one new item around analytics of what we covered in much more depth back in January of last year in our Power Platform Administration and Governance 101 session. all of those concepts apply to Power Platform no matter how I'm using it, right? And I'm going to introduce this concept of looking at Power Platform in personal productivity mode or as an extension of Office 365 versus looking at Power Platform in enterprise mode where I'm developing line of business and enterprise applications. And those basic governance foundations and principles apply to both modes of usage, right? Like, we can use those capabilities no matter how we're leveraging Power Platform. At this point, as we start to think about what does Power Platform look like in enterprise mode, like what does that mean? What additional capabilities come through that mode? We're going to start to think about the enhanced governance capabilities that come hand in hand with the decision to start utilizing Power Platform in enterprise mode versus exclusively working in that productivity mode. So when I talk about that personal productivity or small team productivity application model, like what does that mean, right? Well, really what that refers to are the limited Power Platform entitlements that come with M365, right? So I probably have some level of availability of Power BI. In this tech series, we're focused more so on Power Apps, Power Automate, and the other core components of Power Platform, right? So I have limited entitlements to Power Apps. I can do Canvas apps that are connected to standard data sources, predominantly those O365 based data sources. I could do Power Automate that uses the standard connectors, right? Same concept there. And when I think about the data sources that I'm mostly using in this productivity mode, like maybe I'm using Dataverse. There's actually a limited entitlement for Dataverse, namely Dataverse for Teams, that's available in this productivity mode. Most often, it seems folks are starting with, connecting to SharePoint repositories, SharePoint lists, maybe Excel files, etc. And I'm either, literally using Power Platform as an extension of Office, where I'm going into like the SharePoint user interface and I'm creating an automation or I'm creating an application directly from SharePoint or from Teams, for example. Or I'm going into Power Platform directly, but the nature of the artifacts that I'm creating, the nature of the data sources that I'm connecting to are such that I'm still operating in this personal productivity mode. And a couple things I want to highlight here is when we talk about productivity application model, we're typically talking about every maker, citizen developers, business makers, whatever we want to call them, right? Like this is a very approachable tool set in this mode. We have tools like Maker Copilots and can facilitate AI assisted development, which just makes the platform even more approachable for folks that don't have an existing familiarity with it. So we're talking about a large population of users, and we're generally talking about data sources that are not terribly complex, not terribly sensitive, and ideally not mission critical, right? We're not talking about SQL Server here. We're not talking about our classic enterprise data sources. And so with this mode, we often allow, a higher degree of freedom. We're certainly defining DLP policies and things of that nature to ensure that folks are sticking within this mode. But it's more about monitoring what's going on rather than proactively managing it. And that's the type of trend that we get into when we get into enterprise mode. So if we put that in the context of an adoption maturity model, right? Like most folks, frankly, start out in this personal productivity mode, right? Like we're exploring ideas that we can address in Power Platform for personal or small team productivity, right? We're mainly focused on, simple to modest use cases with existing data sources and services that we're familiar with using, right? As we progress across this spectrum and we start getting into more complex use cases, complex data structures, certainly if we get into mission critical use cases, right? Like now we're getting into line of business or enterprise mode. Now there's a higher level of scrutiny that we should hold ourselves accountable to. And certainly, the progression across the spectrum, like rarely is that strictly chronological. Right, like we might have thousands of folks that are experimenting with personal and team productivity, but we have a couple of isolated teams that are up in that capable mode and are building mission critical apps. But as we progress along this maturity model, we're starting to progress from using Power Platform explicitly or exclusively in this productivity mode and getting into our enterprise mode of app development and adoption. So that often begs the question, like, why would I want to build an enterprise application in a low code platform, right? Like I have these application development teams that are well versed in, pro code development tools. I just wanted to offer a little bit of commentary on that, right? Like if I'm a full stack developer and I've been creating applications, for the duration of my career, right? Like if I'm going to create a net new application, I have to start at the very bottom. I got to build from the ground up, right? I have to start with a data model. I need to attend to what I'm going to do to ensure data integrity with validations, business rules, et cetera. I have to think about processes and automation and workflow processes and a guided user experience at a number of different layers of the stack. I have to think about one or more user interfaces. Like there's a lot of work that I have to do, and I'm starting from the platform. Maybe I'm starting with infrastructure. I'm at least starting with platform. There's a lot of work that I have to do to get to the point where I can actually focus on the value added aspects of my application. So that's one thing, just accelerating the rate at which I can start focusing on the value add and the actual objectives of the solution that I'm developing. The other thing is, as we have multiple development teams developing multiple solutions, like each developer or each team has to pick a tool or a platform that they're going to use at each level of this application stack. And ultimately, what we end up with is a variety of things that we have to support, a variety of skill sets that we need, a variety of platform components that we need to think about how we're going to maintain and what's going to happen with new releases. And heaven forbid something gets deprecated. Now we got to rebuild, replatform. I got to think about regression testing when any of these components change. It creates technical debt, right? It's less efficient at the outset, and I'm steadily accumulating more technical debt. And then we contrast that with what enterprise app development looks like in the Power Platform, where we're using a standard platform, a standard tool set for all levels of the application stack. This is basically an application platform as a service that addresses the data model, business process, automation, multiple types of user interfaces. All of it is maintained on your behalf. It's all rationalized, and a lot of the responsibility for the ongoing maintenance, there's no installing, there's no deploying. I don't have to think about high availability and security and encryption and auditing. Like all of those things are accommodated for me. So these are just some of many reasons why I would want to progress into using this enterprise mode of application development. And of course, no matter what mode, or no matter what approach I choose, right? Like I have to think about things like application lifecycle management, security, auditing, governance, et cetera. And that's what we're slowly but steadily building towards with the Power Platform here. So we looked at what Power Platform looks like in productivity mode. Now, what does it look like in enterprise mode? Well, I have a similar tool set across the top here, right? Like, and I'm still potentially, depending on your adoption model, I'm still potentially targeting every maker, low code makers, full stack developers, et cetera. Now I have full access to Power Apps. I can not only build Canvas apps, I can build model-driven apps, and I can go true no code. With Power Automate, I have access to all the connectors. I can use robotic process automation. I also now have access to tools like Power Pages, where I can build these public-facing applications hosted on websites, built on Dataverse. I can use Copilot Studio for those chatbot experiences. And of course, last but not least, I have access to Dataverse, that native first-party data platform within Power Platform. I can still use these AI-assisted development tools through our Maker Copilot. But I also want to make sure that we're aware of this concept of low code with no cliffs, right? Like low code should not exist on an isolated island. If and when I reach the point where I'm encountering difficulties addressing specific complexities or business needs with the low code platform, I can always pivot to a code first developer approach and tools, right? So I have the full complement of Azure services available to me that I can use to extend what I'm mainly focused on doing in the low code platform. Specifically, I can think about things like custom connectors, right? Complex business logic. I could go write an Azure Function app for that. I could wrap it with a webhook or a custom API, and then I can create a custom connector that brings that custom business logic, that custom API into Power Platform in a low-code friendly manner as a custom connector. Maybe I have legacy homegrown applications that need to be able to connect to my structured data in Dataverse. Like, guess what? I got a Dataverse web API. Every time I create a table in Dataverse, I can automatically get an API endpoint for that new table. There's no development required, et cetera, right? So also want to make sure that when we're talking about low code and what that looks like in enterprise mode, it's not just the low code tools. Of course, we want to use these to the degree possible because that's what's delivering on the fundamental value propositions. But I always have the ability to pivot to these code first developer tools. Now, how does the governance differ when we start to transition from productivity apps to enterprise apps? All right, well, it gets more expansive, right? Again, we're touching enterprise data sources. We're building solutions that are targeting a higher population of end users. They're probably or perhaps mission critical applications, right? Like we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard and a higher level of accountability. So we move beyond the standard governance features, which we've already touched on and addressed thoroughly in previous sessions, into enterprise mode applications. And when we get into enterprise governance, of course, we're adopting the platform in enterprise mode. So enterprise governance, just like enterprise mode for Power Platform, it does require premium licensing. So that's one thing to understand up front. Once we've made that decision to move into enterprise mode, of course, we're going to have premium licensing. But now some of the capabilities we get into are concepts like we can set hard limits on the number of on sharing for applications. We get into like long-term data retention policies. We get into more advanced security concepts like IP firewalls and IP cookie bindings and customer managed keys when that comes to the government community cloud. By the way, most of what we're talking about here is going to be available in GCC, and I've made sure to call out the handful of items that are not yet available in GCC, just so as not to mislead you all. But some of the exciting things that will be coming to GCC include Purview integration and Sentinel integration. We can integrate with App Insights, Azure Application Insights. Really just starting to get into much more advanced governance controls that are in keeping with the idea that we're supplementing our low-code platform with dev first or developer first tools as well. Right, so specifically honing in on managed environments, because managed environments is a key concept and is a mechanism through which many of these enterprise governance tools come to bear. Right, with managed environments, we're striving to deliver more visibility and more control over what's going on in Power Platform with less effort. Right, and so some of the features that I want to call out, and John, I'll transition to you here shortly. He's actually going to take the ball and run with it and demonstrate many of these features for us. But when it comes to more control, we can set strict sharing limits by environment, right? That means that in our non-production environment, we can restrict the sharing of artifacts. That's a simple, easy, and effective way to ensure that we're not developing in production, that all production artifacts are going through a dev pipeline and are being released into production before they can actually be shared out with a broader user base. We can use the native solution checker tool within Power Platform and enforce the usage of that tool, which checks for things like accessibility concerns in our applications or performance concerns. We can use the concept of environment groups, which is going to allow us to define rules for environments and to enforce our governance policies at scale rather than having to go environment by environment. We have these enhanced security concerns or capabilities around IP firewalls and IP cookie binding. And all that comes with less effort, right? Like it's super easy to activate managed environments. It's literally a toggle on the environment and elect a small handful of options associated with the activation of the managed environment. There's really no maintenance to it other than maintaining the elections that we've made for those environments. And then there's super important concepts around pipelines, native ALM pipeline automation within Power Platform. We did a session on this previously, and John's going to take us a fair bit deeper into pipelines and specifically how we utilize pipelines in conjunction with some of these other concepts to create kind of delegated development models with central IT or app development team oversight and control over to those release pipelines that we've defined. We can also use a concept of default environment routing, which becomes super important in terms of like, you know, you may be sitting there thinking like, hey, Doug, that's great. But one of my biggest problems is how do I rationalize and deal with the mess that is my default environment? Well, one very important thing you can do is you can start routing makers, new makers in particularly, to their own personal developer environments that we can tear down and redeploy whenever we want. But it starts getting people out of the default environment and routing them to a safe, controlled space with specific policies and procedures around it to do their experimentation and to do their own personal development work. So when all of these capabilities come to bear together, it allows us to build towards a very comprehensive and effective governance strategy. And John, this is where I think I get to pass the ball to you, and you can take us through some of this and then talk about how these things come together, and then strategy ideas and recommendations for how folks actually implement and use these tools.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share a screen here because it's much more interesting than looking at me. I've answered some of the questions in the chat, but just keep dropping them in there. I'm sure some of this stuff we're going to talk about is going to bring up more. Are you able to see the screen I'm sharing?
Not quite yet.
Interesting.
Do you see it, Mr. Bell?
I do not.
Interesting. I have a message that says you're sharing your screen right now. Yeah, I bet you can see that. That'll wake you up.
I can see a large John Legrid, yeah.
Yeah, that's like nightmares right there. We'll try this one.
I think it's coming. Looks like it's coming. Yep, we got it now, John. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go through all the new features. Now, a couple things to be aware of. I have been working for the last year with Product Group to try to get all these new features into our Gov Clouds. Last week, we did a full rollout of all the features I'm showing you. So there's nothing that I'm showing you today that should not already be available in your tenant. I will point out, however, that there are some restrictions specifically on developer environments where you have to, if you have shut off your developer plan before to try to keep people from creating developer environments under the old plan, then they will not show up now. So you may need to work with your tenant admin to make sure that the developer plan is not turned off for your environment or for your tenant, or else you won't see some of these features. But I will, let's walk through really quickly and kind of talk about how this all fits together. I think probably the first place to start is we'll go to the environment screen. And what we're going to do is just for fun, I want to show you what this looks like now when I go to create a new environment. And you'll notice that in addition to choosing a name, I can also choose an environment group into which I want an environment to be placed. And so the concept of environment groups is that I can effectively create a unit of delegation inside of the Power Platform Admin Center. And so think about this as perhaps I want to have different agencies to have their own test and production and developer environments, primarily test and production environments. And I want to actually give them the authority to go promote their solutions up through and all the way into production. And so the idea here is that as you begin building enterprise applications, that the tenant admins will still be able to control which enterprise assets you touch, but they will be able to delegate a lot of the responsibility and some of the authority for managing the code promotion process through pipelines. You'll also notice here I can select a developer environment now, which I couldn't do before. I have the option in a developer environment to be on an early release, although this, frankly, in GovClouds is not that useful because we generally don't release things into government clouds until it's GA in commercial. The other thing, and this is a couple of pretty critical things down here. One, you'll notice there's this create on behalf setting. So what this allows a tenant admin to do is to go manually create a developer environment for someone in the organization. It's critical that the tenant admin clicks this create on behalf of button and then puts in the owner, because if they don't, then the developer environment gets created in the admin's name, and developer environments are limited to 3 per user. So a tenant admin can create 3, and then they're going to start getting messages saying you've already created all the environments you can create. So, and this has caused some confusion. So I want to clear it up. That if an environment's being created for you by a tenant admin, then they have to create this on behalf of you as opposed to creating it on their own. You'll also notice that all developer environments include a Dataverse data store, and those cannot be removed, which of course makes sense because the whole concept of the developer environment is to give you a premium environment where you can explore different features and functionality based on which DLP policies have been activated for you, but that it takes you out of the default environment so you can build and innovate within that environment. Now, one question we get a lot is why 3 developer environments? Well, the reality is, as we've been using these developer environments in commercial for the last year, what we're finding is that you might have an individual with a developer environment for their playground, but then as you start building applications, you may say have the development lead for a new solution have a developer environment, but then they will go and share their developer environment with a number of developers, and they can work on that solution together in that environment. And of course, as we'll see in a second, you can also limit how many people you can share the environment with as well. So this is conceptually kind of where we're going, is that we don't want organizations to limit access to the platform because of the cost of environment storage. And so to eliminate that, what we've done is provide developer environments, which are at no charge to the organization. Each individual can have up to 3. And you can also then use those developer environments as part of a dev test prod cycle in pipelines, which I will show you in a second. So that's basically how you go in and create developer environments, although obviously this is not a very productive way to create them if you have to go through and create each one individually. So we are going to go through in a second and show you how to fix that. Actually, though, before I do that, I want to talk about a couple of the features of having a managed developer environment. So I'm going to open up an existing developer environment. So you'll notice here I have a set of environments set up for pipelines. So I have a developer, a test, a prod, and then a host environment. We're just going to go look real quick in the developer environment at the settings. And you'll notice here that my limit sharing is grayed out, and that my solution checker enforcement is grayed out, okay? The reason it's grayed out is that this developer environment is part of an environment group, and the manager of that environment group has said any developer environment in this group has to have these settings. So this is the other real power of using the whole integrated platform, is that not only can I give a developer environment out, but I can very specifically control what a team of users or developers can do with that environment. And I can have those rules varied based on different agencies or different parts of the organization who might have different rules that they want to enforce. So let's go and talk about this concept of groups of environments. And so here I have an environment group, and if I go through and I open up my my environment group for my demo pipelines, you'll notice I have multiple environments in this group. And then I also can apply rules. Now, today there are 4 rules for developer that I can place in an environment group. They control how many people how many people I can share a Canvas app with, whether I enforce solution checker and to what level, how long backups are retained, and generative AI settings. There are 7 in commercial. The 3 commercial rules will be rolling into GCC and other GovClouds post Ignite. And there are currently about 25 or 30 rules that will release after Ignite, and another 20 or 30 over the next couple of months. And so you're going to see this dramatically expanded over the next few months. In fact, the goal is that any setting that is an environment level setting in the Power Platform Admin Center would be something you could allow an environment group administrator to go through and set for all of their environments. So again, in the fullness of time, what you will see is that environment groups become a delegation model to allow delegated administration for a specific agency or for a specific initiative, where all of those things can be, the central IT can basically not have to be involved in simple things like adding people to different groups for testing, creating new developer environments and assigning them, managing the pipelines, all those kind of things. Because the reality is organizations can't grow organically if they're going to be consistently bound by central IT's available resources. So we have to have a reasonable way to delegate those responsibilities, but to also maintain the level of control and auditability. And again, since all of this configuration is being done in Dataverse, everything is auditable, everything is traceable, nothing happens without full visibility at the tenant level. So again, I have my environment group. I can group those together. I can create rules. I can publish them. What you don't see here is a UI for assigning the group admin. Today, that group admin assignment is done through PowerShell and will be for the foreseeable future. Again, there will be in the spring, there'll be much more detailed UI around this. But again, the idea today is let's get the technology out there. Let's get people to start using it, give them a way to begin testing. And so that obviously is part of what we're working on. So again, in my environment groups, the other thing it's important to point out is that today we don't really recommend that you put your developer environments and your production and testing and production environments in the same groups. And the reason for that is that you may want to have more restrictive policies applied to developer environments than you do to production environments. And so, in fact, the common initial way to deploy this is that everybody goes in the same developer environment group with very restrictive permissions, and then you move them into other developer environment groups that have less restrictive permissions, perhaps by agency or department. And so that's really kind of the more important thing to understand is kind of how that all works. And so, as Doug mentioned, there is a way to go through and get people to begin developing outside of the default environment. But if you had to go through and manually create all those developer environments, that would be a very time-consuming task. And so we have this feature called environment routing. And so you'll notice here that if I turn on environment routing, then I can also specify whether all makers should get their own developer environments assigned, or whether only new makers should get developer environments assigned. Now, typically you already have all your makers. You don't have a lot of new makers, but you still want to restrict to whom a developer environment is assigned. And so the way you do that is you pick a specific environment group. So for example, you might have, the tenant level, this is my tenant environment developer group, and put everybody into that group. But then just so you can control this, so not everybody in the organization gets it, you might want to go group by group. So say, for example, I would go into my security group and say, I'm going to give this to IT first. So I'm going to set an IT security group, and then only people in IT are going to get these dev environments. Once they have fleshed it out and said, yes, this is what we want to do, then maybe you add another agency, and that agency then begins getting their developer environment. So you can roll this out over time by setting these security groups and having those get rolled out over time. So again, conceptually then, I would not recommend you somebody turn this on and everybody get developer environments. It'll be very confusing. I would roll this out a piece at a time just by changing this security group, and then approach it more as a kind of a crawl, walk, run exercise, where you start with a small group and prove out your policies and prove out your performance and things, and then move that beyond there. So that at a high level is kind of what the developer environments are, developer environments, environment groups, and environment routing. But again, the way to think about this is that developer environments get me out of the default environment and let me do a lot of different things, more than I can do with simply productivity models. We believe that this is going to be the thing that allows customers to begin building real enterprise applications, but to use low-code developers to accomplish that. Now, one of the other key features around this is I don't want people to use the simple productivity model of make publish. I want to have some visibility into these applications, and I at least want to go through a dev, test, and prod kind of cycle. I might want to do dev, test, QA, and prod, where I actually do a QA environment. I copy a production environment and make sure that when I deploy things, things don't break because they're overriding other things. And so in order to do that, you can set up what are called pipelines. And so let's switch over real quick first and look at a developer experience. So I'm a developer. I'm in the Maker portal. I've opened up one of my solutions, and my solution contains, in this case, a single Canvas app. One of the new tabs here is a pipelines tab. And so when I click on the pipelines tab, then I can go pick which pipeline I should deploy this application. So there may be cases where developers working with multiple agencies, a developer's working on multiple projects, and you want to make sure that whatever pipeline you set up for that different organization or project, I want it to flow through the right pipeline. And so I'll pick the pipeline that I want to flow through. And then basically all I have to do is click on deploy, and that's going to take this application, package it up, push it to the new environment, deploy it in that new environment, and then it's going to alert me when that gets deployed. Now I can set this up in a way so that a couple of different things can happen. I can require an approval before it goes to test. I can also require an approval before it goes to prod, and those can be different approvals. I can allow it to only proceed if it passes the solution checker. So if there are certain things I know that are never going to fly even in test, then I can set the solution checker up to block it if it has any errors. So I have a lot of control over what gets deployed. I think the more important thing to recognize here is that in most of the organizations I've worked with over the last year, that final deploy to production is always done by a central IT organization, because they want to know when something goes into production, if it's touching their enterprise assets. They want to see what the impact will be and understand what that impact is. And so you can have different people and different functions throughout these processes that decide on those deployments, that push those deployments through. So how does this all get configured? Under the covers, this is all being managed using a deployment pipeline application, which of course is
the dreaded Teams banner, I take it.
Trying to get it to. There we go. Yeah. All right. So, so you'll notice here that now this is an application that runs in the pipeline host, and it lets you manage all of the different pipelines that you have. Now, in this particular case, I only have one, but in most organizations, they can have 50 or 100 different pipelines being managed here. And so this sample pipeline is simply for me to show the sample solution promotion. But when I click into this pipeline, what I can see is basically just an overview of the pipeline. And here is where I can see all of the developer environments that have been linked to my pipeline. And so I have to add a development environment to this pipeline, or else it won't show up in that dropdown. Now, we are adding some functionality in the next couple of months. It's already in commercial, so it should be in GCC soon, where if you wanted to have an organizational default pipeline, you could set that so that anyone who doesn't have a specifically assigned pipeline would get into an organizational pipeline that's managed by central IT. Again, that's up to you as to whether you would always want to have a specific pipeline assigned based on an agency or a project, or whether you want to do that as an organization. If there isn't an existing environment there, I can go back. I can go click on new development environment. I simply put in the environment ID and the type and the name, and that gets added to this. But all this management takes place within this application. I can also see what deployment stages have been configured. So in this particular case, I have a dev to test pipeline, and I have a test to production pipeline. Okay, and you'll notice here this is asking, is this a delegated deployment? So what that means is this promotion happening in the ID of the user, the maker, or is the promotion happening with a service principal? And obviously, when I go to production, I don't want the maker's credential in production. I only want a service principal to do this promotion, so the maker's credential doesn't appear in any production environment. And so, and that really is as simple as going in to the pipeline definition and defining whether this is a delegated deployment or not, and setting up a service principal. Okay. The other thing I want to point out, because most organizations also use these features, notice there is a pre-export step and a pre-deployment step that you can set. So the idea here is that, let's say, for example, that you have pipelines which are a source code promotion tool, not a source code management tool. What I mean by that is the source stays in Dataverse throughout this entire process. But we do have organizations who say, you know what, I'm fine with the code staying in Dataverse until it goes to production. But once it goes to production, I want this to be in our Azure DevOps instance, or I want it in GitHub, or I want it in our SharePoint code library, whatever that code library is for our source control. And so I can actually set a pre-deployment step, or actually I can also do a post-deployment step on a pipeline, so that after something gets successfully deployed, that it will then take the source code out of the pipeline and then push it into Git, or push it into Azure DevOps, right? So if I want to have pipelines integrate with my organizational source code management system, then I can do that today through these deployment steps. In the future, you may have seen some of the demos we've shown recently around the more direct integration we're doing with GitHub and GitHub Labs. And so you will see much tighter integration with source code repositories in the future. But today, the place where source from Dataverse meets enterprise source happens at that deployment phase, where I would then kind of export that content. So that is my time. Doug, thank you so much for the opportunity to present, and happy to answer any questions you have. I also want to put in a shameless plug. You will be seeing a whole lot more videos like this with more detail. There's a YouTube channel on governance. If you look up my name and look up Power Platform Governance, there's already a set of videos there. And there'll be a ton more coming out right after Ignite. And several of them will be GovCloud specific, because there's a lot of differences between commercial and government clouds. And so we'll be producing specific government cloud versions.
Perfect. Thank you, John. I, for one, look forward to the new catalog of YouTube videos. The first iteration on your series was great. I was going to ask you real quick, John, before you go, if you wouldn't mind just kind of recapping. There's a couple more slides here that kind of allow us to tell that end-to-end story real quick. If you wouldn't mind just running through these before we open up to a couple questions.
I can't see the slides.
Deb, can you see my slides again?
I do.
Oh, now I see it. Okay. My brain's working really slow today. My eyes are slow. So basically, this is really just kind of a summary of what we've talked about. And again, the idea here is that in order to grow, we can't depend on our tenant admins to do all the work. And so being able to build this delegation model is one of the key things that we're fleshing out in the new administration product suite over the next 6 to 12 months. And so basically the way you're going to accomplish this is using environment groups and rules, either by agency or by initiative. You're going to set up the default environment routing, and using the security group to make sure that only the people who need to have the developer environments during this testing have those. You're going to have code promotion environments, test and prod that will be managed. The other thing that's important to point out is that there is now a setting that you can place on an environment. Now, the tenant admin will have to do this, but a tenant admin can now configure an environment so that only managed code can go into that environment. That's a very critical feature. So you want to make sure when you configure any production environment that they put the setting on, so you don't get any unmanaged code placed into a production environment. In fact, you probably shouldn't have it in test either. The only place you should ever see unmanaged code is in a developer environment. because that's where it's designed to be modified. And then we talked about power pipelines and ALM, and I just want to reiterate that power pipelines is a code promotion tool, not a source code management tool. The source code is managed in Dataverse. For full lifecycle management, you need source code management, which we can accomplish with a post promotion flow. But longer term, we will have more tightly integrated ALM. Doug, go to the next slide. I'm pretty sure that's pretty much what the next slide says. But
yeah. Yep, I think we touched on these concepts, but thanks again, John. I really appreciate it. I love the way it's just a combination of these and kind of simple, newer admin features that are aspects of managed environments coming together with pipelines and some enhanced capabilities around pipelines, which is also a feature of managed environments to just create this, I think I saw in the chat, Dave Bailey, this autonomous delegation model, right? And I think that's so powerful when we just have this vision for how these different concepts work together and what that means for us as administrators that want to have oversight, want to have control, but don't want to be responsible for executing everything. So thank you very much. Looks like, John, there was one question in the chat, and I think this was based on something you said. There were quite a few questions in the chat. We got back to a lot of them, and I know we're short on time, so I did want to call one out. And there was a statement that I think you made that was like, you don't want to have developer environments for everyone, or I'm sure this is paraphrasing. It was kind of confused what that meant, especially coupled with the concept of environment routings, creating developer environments for everyone. And really the difference between these developer environments or development environments that are provisioned through environment routing, and the fact that those shouldn't really be viewed as like individual productivity environments. So I guess the question is just maybe just a reiteration of the fact that this developer environments that we're talking about, those are meant to be potentially temporary workspaces for working on a particular initiative. Just talk about like the appropriate use a little bit more.
Yeah, so let me be clear about what I thought I said, but again, at my age, God only knows what I said. What I said was you don't want to roll out developer environments to everyone all at the same time. So I'm not saying you wouldn't give them to everyone. I'm saying you wouldn't do them all at the same time, right?
Wouldn't go proactively go out and create 20,000 developer environments.
Right. I would crawl, walk, run. I would deal with groups, a group at a time until you get your standards and your practices and your help desks ready to support it. Because the worst thing that happen is to inundate your support staff with requests for support until you have a set of policies in place for how you're going to manage them. The other thing to recognize is that we do have a lot of organizations that every time a developer or a maker finishes an initiative, they whack the developer environment and they force routing to recreate it. So, in the classic Microsoft sense, you should think of developer environments as cattle, not pets. So don't assume that they're going to be around forever. One of the biggest issues with any kind of developer environment is that any artifacts you leave in that environment could inadvertently get included in some future system if you're not dealing with a clean environment. So I would generally assume that you might give someone a developer environment for them to play in, but as soon as you start building things that are going to go to production, don't put it in their play environment. Create a real developer environment specifically for that task and operate on it there. And a lot of these recommendations will be in the videos that I'm coming out with, because our goal here is that you get a little bit more guidance around how to do this, so you don't have to go redo it later. But again, it's always crawl first and then move from there.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, John. And yes, reiterate, definitely looking forward to having the refresh video series. I, for one, really value those. So thank you for doing that work. A couple more questions, but I think we need to move on. Deb dropped a survey link. As always, we like to know how we did. Is the content useful? How can we make these things better? We do these for you. So please provide us feedback and let us know if it is helpful and how we can make them better. So I'll just pause there for a minute. Deb posted in the chat just a few minutes ago. There's a quick survey link that we ask that you would all just give us your quick 30-second feedback on this session.